Happy Friday, everyone! I've got Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey with me, and that means it's time for my next episode of Toy Box Tutorials. Today, I'm going to teach you how to use the Racing Gate. You can find that toy in the Creativitoys drawer. It's a very simple toy. Whenever it's crossed by a player, it will trigger whatever it's connected to. And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can use this toy to create a race. So I'm going to drop a racing gate down here, about like that. And you'll notice the infinity logo is facing that way. If you look at it from this direction, it's a little backwards. So even though the gate will work either way, we're going to flip this around just because I want my race to go that way. All right, let's take a look at this toy itself before we do anything with it. So if we open up the logic menu for it, we look under properties, there is one property and it's called deactivate when triggered. And if you turn this on, when one of the players goes through this gate, it will automatically deactivate that gate for that player. So you don't have to do it with a logic connection. If you leave this off, the gate stays active all the time. You have to explicitly turn that off or deactivate it with a logic connection. So we'll go ahead and leave that on for right now. Under the logic connections, these are the trigger signals that this toy will broadcast. So the first one, crossed always on, means that whenever a player crosses this, it doesn't matter if the gate is active or deactivated, it will always broadcast this trigger signal anytime any player or anything passes through this gate. This one is used when it's crossed by any player and you don't care which player it is. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this one in a minute. And then you can also trigger off of specific players, so when it's crossed by player 1 or player 2. And of course there's player 3 and player 4, which are no longer used because the Disney Infinity servers are down and there's no more online play. So, all right, so those are the trigger signals. And then this toy also has a few behaviors. And to just go ahead and demonstrate that, let me just throw a button down here real quick. And if we open the logic menu for that and do a new logic connection when pressed, come over to the racing gate, you notice there's 4 things you can do with this toy. Other toys can direct it to deactivate itself for all players, meaning it won't be active for any players. You can activate it for all players, which you'll need to do if you deactivate it. And then you can activate or deactivate for the triggering player. So if we deactivate for all players, for example, right now you'll see by default it has that logo. And when we pass through it, it deactivated itself because Mickey went through it. But you can also use this toy to do that as well. And that would do the same thing as if Mickey just walked through that gate. And then likewise, if we edit this and we make it activate for all players, that will turn it back on. Like that. All right, let me go ahead and delete this button because we're done with that. And now that we've seen the options that are available for this toy, let's use it to build a race. And to do that, we're going to need a few additional toys, and I've already placed these down ahead of time just to save a little bit of time. You can find all of these in the Creativitoys drawer. First of all, we're going to need the challenge maker and a timer. And I covered both of these toys back in episode 37, so it has been a while since we've seen these. If you need a refresher, you can go back and watch that episode. We built a similar race in that episode, by the way, but we used a path creator to do it, and it automatically created racing gates at each of the path points. But you can use the racing gate directly, which is what we're going to do today, and there are times where you might want to do that. So for example, as I mentioned last time, if you create a very, very long path, you'll add a lot of lag in your toy box and you can potentially crash it. So if you want a really long race, probably using the racing gates is the way to go. So we're going to use a challenge maker and a timer. We also need a logic gate, and I covered that back in episode 11. We're also going to need a level starter, and I covered this back in episode 21. And eventually we're going to need 2 counters, and I covered that toy back in episode 16. I've also placed down a couple of locators, and I'm going to make this a reindeer race, so we're going to need a couple of mounts as well. So let me go up to the mounts drawer. And those are a lot of toys, but they're really not difficult to hook up, as you're going to see in a moment. Okay, so there's a couple of Svens. Alright, so the easiest race you can probably build with this is to use a single racing gate as a finish line, basically. And so we're actually going to start the race down here, and we'll finish it when we cross the finish line. So that's the easy one. And ideally, you'll want to place some distance between these with some obstacles in between. Maybe some simple barriers like fences and trees, or hazardous barriers like lava or rotating spikes, but I'm going to keep it simple for the purpose of this illustration. So first we'll come over to the challenge maker, and I'm going to go into the properties. Since we're going to time the players with the timer, we're going to change this to be time. That will be the results score label, and all of the rest of these properties are fine. And then we're going to connect up to the 2 locators. So this first one here will be the player 1 start position. New locator connection on the challenge maker. This one will be player 2, their starting location. And then we're going to set up the timer. This is going to keep track of how long it takes the player to finish the race. So under the properties, I'm going to set the target time to be the highest possible number, which is 9,999. And I'm going to turn off both of these flags for right now, because we're going to turn on the visible display with a logic connection. And we definitely want to count upwards, so we need to turn this bottom flag off. Alright, on the challenge maker, we'll open a logic menu and we'll do a new logic connection, and we're going to set up the timer first. There's 2 things I want to do on invites accepted. The first one is I want to come over here and reset the timer in case we race this twice. But I also want to turn it on. And as I've shown you in the past, if we go to the challenge maker and do another logic connection, invites accepted, I cannot create a second connection to this same toy. So that's why I have the logic gate here. I'm just going to use that as a pass-through. So we'll input to that gate, and then on the logic gate we'll output, and I'll use that to turn on the timer display. Alright, so that resets the timer and displays it on the screen when the invites are accepted. On the challenge maker, a new logic connection, when started, we'll come over to the timer and start the timer. And then a new logic connection on the challenge maker when the game is ended. We're going to come over and pause the timer. So that's when the game finishes successfully or the player aborts. And then a new logic connection when the results window is closed at the end. We'll go ahead and hide the timer. And then the last thing we'll do with the timer is a new time results connection. We'll connect that up to the timer so that when the race is over we can see the results. Alright, so that's it for the timer, the timer and the challenge maker. Alright, now this racing gate, we don't want to have this active except when the race is going. And so I'm going to use the level starter over here to turn that off. So when we first load up the toy box, the level starter on Catalyze will come over to the racing gate and deactivate it for all players. And what that means is when the challenge starts, we need to turn that on. And so on the challenge maker, we'll do a new logic connection on invites accepted. Come over and activate for all players. And then on the challenge maker, a new logic connection when the game is ended and it's all done, we'll turn this back off. And we'll deactivate it for all players. Okay, and then the last thing we need to do is when the players cross this, we need to record the fact that they completed the game. So on the racing gate, we'll do a new logic connection. And I'm going to do when crossed by player 1, we'll come over to the challenge maker and we'll log player 1's completion. And you'll notice it says multiple connections created at the bottom. So if we go and look at the thing here, you'll notice it has created 4 connections to the challenge maker. It actually automatically did the other players for us. So that's kind of nice. So I don't have to do player 2. And it'll do that also, by the way, if we do a new logic connection when crossed by player. This will actually create a 5th one, but they essentially do the same thing. So that's kind of a handy time saver that I really like. And that's it for the simple race. There's really not too much to it. So let's go ahead and try it out. So we'll go hop on Sven. We'll come right on top of the challenge maker. We're going to start the challenge. And it should have reset that. There it goes. Alright, so then we run ahead, and as soon as we pass through here, we've crossed the finish line and the race is done. And then it shows the results at the end, and there we go. Now you'll notice the gate is deactivated. When we go through it, you heard the sound of the gate being triggered. The only trigger signal it will broadcast when that happens is the crossed always on signal. None of the others get broadcast, so that's kind of important to note. But there's your simple race. But let's suppose what we want to do is something a little bit more involved. Maybe we want to try to guide the player around a circle or through a really long winding course, and so we want to use multiple gates for that. How would you do that? Well, let's go ahead and figure that out here. So I'm going to come to the racing gate, and I'm going to open up the logic menu, and we're going to delete all of these connections. Okay, so we have the 2 signals from the challenge maker to activate it on invites accepted and turn it off when the game is ended, and we have the connection to the level starter to deactivate it when the toy box is loaded. Alright, so there's the first gate, and then we'll put down a few more, 3 more gates to be specific, and we're going to guide the player around a circle here. So if we come back down to the Creativitoys, let's put a gate down here, and that's the right orientation. And then we'll put another gate over here, and we'll put another gate over here. So we'll use a very simple course here with 4 gates. And we need the 4 gates. I mean, you could just use the 1 and let the player kind of guide themselves around. The problem with that, though, is that the player could cross this line and then just turn around and do this and cheat. So the multiple gates will kind of tell the player where they have to go next, and also track their movement, because in order to activate the next gate, they're going to have to pass through the previous gate. So it forces them to take the path that you want them to take. So we're going to be using 4 gates total, and we've already hooked this one up to the level starter. We need to do the others as well. So new logic connection on catalyze. We're going to come over to each of these gates and do the same thing we did with the first one. Is deactivate them for all players, because you don't want any of these gates to be active during the when they're not during the race. And this one we're going to deactivate, and the last one we'll deactivate. New logic connection on catalyze. Deactivate. Alright, the challenge maker is already activating that first gate, which is still what we want. And so what we'll do with the other gates is make sure they're deactivated. So on invites accepted, just make sure that these are all deactivated, just in case they got into some weird state, if the player canceled the game or something happened. On invites accepted, turn this one off. New logic connection on invites accepted, turn this one off. And likewise, when the game is ended, we turned that first gate off. We should do that with the others as well. So just in case the player ended the game early, just want to make sure we turn all of these off. We don't want them to be active at all if no race is going. Game ended. Everything else we've already set up is the same. So there's really not too much more to do when you have multiple gates. And deactivate. Okay, so now the gates are set up to activate and deactivate when the game is running, when the game is ended. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, what I'm going to have happen, and we're going to start the players from back here. So they're actually going to cross this gate twice for a single lap race. And so we're going to use the timer to keep track of how many times the player crosses that gate. So this will be for player 1. So on this first counter, I'm going to leave the target count set at 2. I'm going to turn off the visible display because the player doesn't need to see how many laps they've done. That will stay 0, that will stay off. We'll do the same thing for the counter for player 2. If you wanted a 2-lap race, you'd change this to 3. If you wanted a 3-lap race, you'd set the target count to 4. So that's what you'll need to do. Okay. So the challenge maker then needs to initialize those counters. So a new logic connection on the challenge maker on invites accepted. We'll come over to each of the counters and reset them. New logic connection, invites accepted, reset. Okay? And then when the player crosses this gate, then we want to increment the counters. So new logic connection, when crossed by player 1, we'll come over to the first counter for player 1, and we're going to increment that by 1. And you'll notice it did not create multiple connections that time, which is good. On the racing gate, a new logic connection when crossed by player 2. We'll come over to the counter for player 2 and increment that by 1. Okay? And then on the counter, a new logic connection when the target is reached. This is the first counter. We'll come over to the challenge maker and we'll log player 1's completion. So the gate isn't going to go directly to the challenge maker. It's going to go through these counters and count the number of laps or number of times you're crossing this. So on the racing gate, a new logic, oops, we already did that. On the counter for player 2, new logic connection when target is reached. Come over here and log player 2's completion. Okay, so there's your basic structure for the game. The other part of this now is when the player passes through here, the property that we've set this to is automatically going to deactivate this when triggered. And what we want to have happen is we want to have the next gate light up. Okay, so on here, we're going to do a new logic connection. This is on the first gate. When crossed by player, and now I'll show you what happens with that. We're going to come over to this next gate, and we're going to activate this for the triggering player. And you'll notice it says multiple connections created again. So if we look at that, there are 5 connections that it's made between those two gates. It's done crossed by player, but it's also added all of these. So I guess it's got us covered either way. So we only have to make that connection once. And again, on here, we want to make sure we deactivate when the player comes through here. And so on this gate then, we'll do a new logic connection when crossed by player. We come to the next gate, and we activate the gate for the triggering player. Again, multiple connections created. And again, we want to set the property to deactivate when the player comes through here. And then on this gate, new logic connection when crossed by player. So you can see it's really easy to string together multiple gates. For this one, we want to activate. For the triggering player, we get our multiple connections. Again, under properties, deactivate when triggered. And then on this gate, new logic connection when crossed by player. We'll come back and activate this first one again. Activate for the triggering player. And that creates multiple connections as well. So then passing through here the second time will activate this gate down here, but the race will be over, and as soon as we get the game over signal from here, that'll turn off all the gates. So there we go. That's pretty straightforward. So now we'll hop on and let's give that a try. So we'll start the challenge. Sure be nice if it reset that right at the start on invites accepted. That's what I tried to do, but that timer doesn't want to behave. Alright, so then this one is active, and I just want to show you the next gate down there isn't until we pass through this area, and then that one becomes active. And then if you look down there, that gate isn't active, and now it is. So you can see it's keeping track of the player's progress around here, and likewise the final finish line isn't active until we pass through here, and then that is. And then we cross the line and we're done. So that's a single lap race, and again, if you want multiple laps, you just change the counter, the target value on the counter, the way I described. Now, there's one more thing I'd like to show you. with this racing gate that you need to be aware of. And to do that, I need a second player. So I'm going to put Minnie down on the base, and we're going to bring in Minnie Mouse.
Oh, I missed you too.
And we'll have Minnie hop on the other reindeer. So love the way she skips along. She's one of my favorite characters. Alright, so Minnie is ready to go. So let's hop back on for Mickey. We'll come back over to the challenge maker one more time. We'll invite others. Minnie needs to respond. Alright, so here we go. Here's how this works with two players. So you'll notice the gate is lit up there, the first one, for both of them. And the gates for the others are not. Alright? So when Mickey, for example, player 1 passes through here, you'll notice from Mickey's standpoint, that second gate is lit up now. The one behind me is not, but from Minnie's standpoint, it is. So the racing gate is keeping track per player of which one should be activated and which one isn't. And so now if Minnie passes through here, now that shows up for her, and now it's deactivated for both of them. So the gate is automatically keeping track of that, and you don't need to do anything about it if you've set it up the way that I've showed you. And so that works out pretty well. And so Minnie's going to cheat now and get a head start because I have to switch between controllers. So now she's on up here, but this gate's still lit up for Mickey. And of course the one down there, from Mickey's standpoint, is not lit up until we pass through this gate. And from Minnie's standpoint, nothing happened. And now this gate is lit up for Mickey. And now that one is for Minnie. So you can see each of the gates is taking care of that for us. And so now Minnie crosses the line. She can actually keep racing. So it's not quite like the car race where Minnie has crossed the line and is done, and the player has to wait for the other player to finish. She could keep racing even though her time's already been logged. And then as soon as Mickey crosses the line, now both players have been logged as far as their completion, and now the race ends. So there we go. And now we can go ahead and have Minnie drop off, because that's what I needed to show you, is that race gate behavior when you've got two players. So that's it for the racing gate. You can use this gate to build races, or you can use it as a simple trigger, like a button or a trigger area, to invoke other toys when the player crosses it. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video, or at least found it helpful. If you did, please hit the like button and leave a comment to let me know. Thank you for watching. If you like Disney Infinity and you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe to my channel before you go. If you haven't already done that, just click my photo in the lower right corner. You can also follow me on my blog. That's all for me today. Take care.